Of what these statisticians are doing when we try to apply our methods to actual murders. So our first speaker is Richard Gill, professor at the University of Leiden.
Okay, good morning. So I thought I'd start by reminding us of some first principles. I want to talk about a famous miscarriage of justice in the Netherlands. Which actually I've not been working much on it. I do have slides, but this is very deliberate. I'm starting with reminding us of Principle 3 and Principle 5. Yes, I do have slides as well. But cognitive bias can lead to highly misleading results. That's obvious, and one of the ways in which it goes wrong is when boundaries between disciplines are vague and people in one discipline are starting to give evidence really coming from another, or using their amateur knowledge of different discipline. This also leads to double counting. Evidence has got to be combined sooner or later, and the court is probably the jury or the judges. They are the ones who have got to combine the evidence. If experts start combining evidence before, when giving evidence, and combining not just their ideas about the specific item they've been asked about, but also about neighboring issues in the trial, then evidence is going to get double counted, because different experts are actually going to be presenting as will be treated as independent evidence, but actually the same thing is being used again and again. And this happens very seriously in a celebrated Dutch case, which is what I want to talk to you about. And I have to find full screen mode. So this is my own talk now. Is there an epidemic? Some people think there are. Get the right glasses on. Yes. Okay. So actually this I want to talk to you about a Dutch case, Lucia de Berk, which is now an old case. She was first arrested in 2001, a nurse arrested on suspicion of murdering many of her patients in a hospital in The Hague. Actually, the whole thing, that case started just 7 days before 9/11, so it was a very notable time. And that case, before then I had not been working in forensic statistics, but it led to my interest in forensic statistics, and quite recently to involvement in two other cases concerning alleged serial killer nurses, one from the UK, Ben Geen, and one an Italian case, the most recent case, Daniela Poggiali, started last year. So that's why I'm here, for several reasons, and also what I want to talk about here. So actually, in the last year, 2015, there were in different countries at least 3 of such new cases. UK case of nurse Victorino Chua, who got convicted. Italian case of Daniela Poggiali in Italy, which if you're not from Italy, you will never have heard of. In Germany, there's been a case of Niels H., as some newspapers call him. And these cases are happening all over the world in many countries. And in one particular country, people are very aware about what is happening in their country, but nobody knows what's going on elsewhere. So nobody outside Italy has heard of the Daniela Poggiali case, for instance.
Yesterday, there was another one yesterday.
Yes, and exactly. And Julia also told me yesterday there is another case just started in Italy. I was reminded a couple of days ago by one of my colleagues that another case just started recently in Canada. So they keep popping up. And what concerns me is I think there may be also actually an epidemic of false convictions of innocent nurses. Okay, but we can be very sure now that the Dutch nurse Lucia is innocent, and I'll get back to that. So there's some academic research on this phenomenon, and I was tempted to say academic research, but it's a topic which people are interested in and write academic papers about, and a few of them are listed here. So I should get the pointer. So this is very recent by two UK authors who are actually forensic psychologists, and these authors here and here are some of them are from nursing, some of them are from psychology. I want to show you a little bit from some of these publications. Is this working? Yes. Okay, I'll skip that. So, well, the importance of this paper was it surveyed, what's the number here? 54 cases all over the world, combines a lot of information about them, presents a lot of information about them, and this led to this particular book with this very lurid cover, which proposes a checklist for health authorities to be able to look at, to find out if there's a danger that one of their nurses or other employees is possibly a healthcare serial killer, an HSCK, they're sometimes called, and and that list was actually very much based on the Lucia case, the Dutch case. Okay, so this is the red flag checklist which Professor Ramsland put together, and I'll show you it again here in larger, you can better see it. So there's sort of one item here which is about statistics, which is what I'm going to be talking about, higher incidences of death on his or her shift. So that was, it doesn't say the total here. In this particular paper by these two people, this recent paper, 2014, they studied just the 16 most recent cases involving only nurses, and so 15, and they're all cases in which a nurse has been convicted of serial murder, and in 15 of the 16 there was a higher instance of death on his or her shift. But the authors point out that this is a very dangerous criterion, and in fact pointing to the Dutch case as being a case where Lucia de Berck indeed had a very high instance of death on her shift, or appeared to, but later turned out to be innocent, and so they found this was not a safe red flag item to use. I'm very worried about this list. Look at this: history of mental instability, depression, makes colleagues anxious or suspicious, lied about personal information. There was another one about where is it gone? History of mental instability, depression. So many of these items are certainly items which are reported widely in the media and are elements in the discussion which goes on in a hospital when there is a scare of a healthcare serial killer. It's not so clear whether these are good diagnostic tools for deciding if somebody is a serial killer. They certainly seem to be very good diagnostic tools for finding out if somebody is likely to become suspected of being a serial killer. And that's the worrying thing.
Why have they included some items with 0 cases?
Well, okay, I mean, this is the list which Mrs. Ramsland put together a few years before, and in their selection of 16, I can't see film, where's there he is. Still can't see. There he is. Okay, so they looked at 16, they selected 16 particular cases on, I can't remember exactly what the criterion was, but they should all be nurses. The original papers were also about doctors and other healthcare professionals. And so indeed, none of the 16 satisfied this property or this property or this one. Now, actually, if we, but anyway, if we compute the red flag score for Lucia, who I'm going to tell you about, certainly if we if we compute the score based on what you can read in the newspapers, then she scores extremely high, about 20 or something. And many of these items were also inspired by her case.
What
Oops.
about a random person?
Sorry?
What about a random person?
Yes, they do. No, there's no control group. That's one thing. Okay, there's lots of things to worry about. This kind of research. It certainly looks like. There are a lot of statistical issues in these cases, and I'm not going to talk about most of them. And I'm going to concentrate on inaccurate data, imprecise, inaccurate data, inaccurate in many ways. So, what I'm interested in is, what I'm talking about is a situation where, for instance, a nurse comes under suspicion because of there being more than the expected number of some kind of disturbing events during their shifts. And statistics is often used to say, look, this is impossible, unlikely. It's also often where suspicion first rises. It's often important part of the evidence in a trial, a later trial. But those statistics are based on data, and the data is going to be data of times of events in a hospital, and times when nurses are working in a hospital, and of course also on the nature of events. So somebody has got to decide what is a suspicious event and what is not a suspicious event. And what I want to point to is the extraordinary inaccuracy of the times and the often extraordinary inaccuracy of the times and the categories, allocation of times and categories to events, and also who is doing that and at which stage, and how this can lead to the problems discussed in those two principles I started with. There are many things here I could talk a great deal about. I'm not going to now. Move on. Oops. For under inaccurate data, I got an example from the recent Italian case, Daniela Poggiali, which I've been working on for the defense with Giulia Mortera, who's here. And I want to just show you these two histograms. And this is in Italian, and this is the hours of decease, and these are the minute of the time of decease. And this data is data from a hospital where a certain nurse is accused of murdering perhaps many patients, and the data is basically coming from the times, all times of death of patients in a hospital over 2 years. And there are about 400 or 500 deaths in this period in this hospital. And I want to point out to you here that the hours of death, this enormous peak at the hour 0. All these patients dying somewhere between midnight and 59 minutes after midnight. Can you believe that? And that's a huge peak. It's strange. What's going on there? How come so many people die just after midnight? Well,
Change.
what?
Shift change.
Yeah.
No, they don't change. They don't change at midnight. No. Actually, they change here at 7 o'clock in the morning, where this other large peak is.
You're talking about recorded times.
Yes, I'm talking about recorded times of death, which is all we've got, which is what
Yeah, so
statistical analysis has to be based on. And
the actual,
Maybe wrong.
the real
Like
question
I
is, why
said.
do so many deaths get recorded at midnight?
exactly.
Exactly.
Good question. Yes, yes. So the point I want to make is that recorded times of death are not actually times of death. They are products not of, they don't result just from the time at which somebody dies, but they result from perhaps a complex, partly bureaucratic and or medical process involving getting somebody to sign a paper and fill in a time at some time, and that time can be very far from the real time of death. And it means that if you want to study the association between times of death and presence or absence of nurses, you have to be aware of this. And there's this huge peak at just after midnight. You can also see here in the minutes, many times of death are actually whole hours, and many of them are whole half hours. And almost none of them are in the last 5 minutes of an hour. So these times are very, very inaccurate, and you can ask yourself, how accurate are the times when a nurse is recorded to be working in a hospital? That's also an administrative process. This worries me very much indeed, this huge peak at 7, which is also the time when the night shift and the morning shift actually overlap. And so if a nurse tends to work late, well, to stay long on her shifts and tends to come early to her shifts, she's going to catch more of the deaths which, for whatever reason, tend to get pinpointed at shift changes. So I'm not saying that's what's going on in this case, but it's something which could be going.
Is midnight a shift change? What does
What?
midnight correspond to? Is it a
What?
shift change?
Sorry?
Midnight.
It doesn't correspond to anything. Well,
Oh, we just don't know.
we don't know. Presumably it corresponds to people who died sometime in the night,
I see.
and nobody really knows. And probably it's very important for bureaucratic and legal reasons which day it's actually on. The date on your birth
So
certificate
they
is
don't
rather important.
invent 5 in the morning day.
What?
They don't tend to invent 5 in the morning.
No, they don't tend to invent. So I don't know, and we don't know, and I think that this phenomenon has got a lot to do with the suspicion on this nurse, but I don't know.
But when are the shift changes? It's not just one every
Oh.
24 hours, is there?
3 an hour, 3 a day.
Can we see them?
Sorry, wrong button. You can see this one.
Yeah.
Well, that is a shift change. The next shift change is, where is it? It's about 2 or 3 o'clock.
Right.
It's somewhere here in the mid-afternoon. And then there's one up here, I guess. Yeah, so you don't see the other shift changes. You only see the morning shift change. But of course, a lot changes in the morning. Okay, from the Bengine case, I just want to mention that in that case, there's another issue coming up, which is category of events. What events are we talking about? And I just want to say that in that case where Bengine was initially associated with too many respiratory arrests during his, while he was working at the hospital, wow, even though it later turned out that the number of respiratory arrests in the period when he was supposed to be murdering people was the same, essentially the same, and there's maybe one more than in the previous year. If you look in the trial documents and many expert reports and judges summing up, there is constant shifting whether we're talking about respiratory arrests or other kinds of arrests, and also whether we're talking about any of these events or only unexplained such events. And if we're only talking about unexplained such events, then the question is, who is deciding which events are unexplained or not, and when? So I'll come back to that in the Lucia case in a moment. So here's a quick summary of the Dutch case. She was arrested in 2001 towards, well, sometime in December, I think, but the suspicion arose at the unexpected death of a baby in a children's hospital in The Hague on the 4th of September 2001. And initially there was not much evidence against her, except some very powerful statistical evidence. And in particular, a statistician computed a number of 1 in 342 million, not quite clear 1 in 342 million what, but this number had in, I'm sorry, I think I've actually mistyped it. It should have been 1 in 324. Was it 342? It is 342.
I think it is.
I sometimes mix it up in my mind. The main evidence against her was the statistical evidence of her being there when people were dying. Too much. The statistical evidence was very controversial, and there was huge discussions in the media about it. And anyway, there was an appeal also by the prosecution, because she got a life sentence for 4 murders and 2 attempts, but she'd actually been charged for 14 counts. So also the prosecution wanted actually to have her convicted for much worse. In 2004, she was sentenced again at appeal. Now she was convicted for 7 murders and 3 attempts, and quite amazingly, the evidence against her now is only, or apparently only, medical evidence, and relying on something called a chain proof, which I'll explain to you what it is in a moment. Everything went quiet then, and everybody believed she really was guilty because she had been really proven on medical evidence only. In 2006, a book came out by a philosopher of science called Tom Derksen, who studied the arguments of the court. So this is in the Netherlands. It's an inquisitorial system, not a, what's the other one? Adversarial. Thank you. Not an adversarial. We have a board of wise judges, and after the trial they're obliged to write out their reasoning for their conclusion, so one can study their arguments for their decision. And this guy studied that and tore it to pieces, and I'll show you a little bit of basically what he showed in his book. And that was the beginning of a long procedure which I was also involved in, which involved a judicial inquiry and finally a retrial and finally a not guilty verdict. And the judges at that trial were very emphatic that there had been no murders at all. There had not been any murders at all. It was not a question of just she was not guilty because there was not sufficient evidence to prove her guilty, but there truly had not been any murders at all. There had been a lot of other things which I tell you very little about. Okay, these are the numbers which sent her to jail for life in 2003, and look especially at this top one. These are the numbers here are numbers of shifts, and they're shifts throughout a year, 1 whole year, in a particular ward of a particular hospital. And there are 3 shifts on a day, and so in a year there are about 1,000 shifts, and during that whole year there were, you can see 9 plus 0, there were a total of 9 incidents, and many of those incidents are actually deaths, others are resuscitations, but there were 9 incidents, and they all occurred during Lucia's shifts. She has, how many shifts does she have? 142 of them. She has about 1/6 of the shifts because she's working on the days she works 1 of the 3 shifts. She works about half the days. It's incredibly skewed. Everybody can see this can't be chance. Well, the statistician did a computation, also combining some data from 2 other wards of another hospital a few years before, and came out with this 1 in 342 million. Time. This was basically the evidence used, the primary evidence against her in the trial, first trial. In the retrial in 2004. The reasoning was completely different, the evidence was different. There was apparently proof by toxicology and other many ingredients that she did actually murder one particular baby. So there was sort of medical proof of one murder. Then the argument was she's present at many suspicious deaths. She cannot give an explanation for her presence. She admitted being present at many deaths, more than you would expect. She does not talk about whether or not they are suspicious, but she had to admit that she can't explain why all these deaths happen when she's there.
Surely the explanation is that that's her job and that's her shit.
Well, that would be in the explanation, yes.
Is it more that she can't give an explanation for the high frequency?
She can't give an explanation for the high
She couldn't
frequency
explain why people were always dying on her shift.
on her shifts,
she
and
said
on her shifts and not on other people's shifts.
Yeah.
She couldn't explain that. And the reasoning is that therefore the deaths are likely murders, and of course she's likely the murderer. So actually, I think this reasoning is fine, provided this has been proven. That's a medical issue. I'll come back to that in a moment. And provided that you know that all these other deaths are suspicious deaths. But who decides that these deaths are suspicious or not deaths? Suspicious or not, and on what grounds? What we do know is that the data which led to that table was compiled by hospital doctors in the hospital, perhaps on the day of the trigger event, the morning of the trigger event, and we now know that at that time they were already suspicious of this nurse, and by the happening of the event, probably already convinced that Lucia de Berg was a serial killer. So that's one thing to be a little bit worried about. Medical specialists at a hospital, 2 minutes, thank you. Medical specialists at a hospital responsible for the health of patients in their care are not forensic scientists, but they're giving themselves a job of a forensic scientist here. They compiled that data without using actually any definition of incident, and indeed no definition of time of incident. And the classification of shifts as being with or without the incident was performed by the doctors of the hospital itself, knowing whether or not Lucia was there, and in a state of suspecting her to be a killer already. Okay, I will not go into this, but there has been some further investigation into these numbers, and they turn out to be badly wrong, I think. We'll skip that. It becomes clear from the book of Derksen that the judgment that certain deaths are suspicious was done by medical specialists who know whether or not Lucia is present, and one of them actually explicitly says, normally I would not have thought this event was suspicious, but because Lucia is there, I'm inclined to believe it is. Okay, that's actually written in their written deposition to the court. Apparently the judges didn't sort of notice that. Okay, I have to be fast, I have to finish. In 2010, the case was reopened after a long struggle, and something went right then and something was done very differently then, which is that instead of having Dutch judges put all the evidence together from many different experts, the medical dossiers of each of 3 key cases were given in their entirety, which had not happened before, to an independent multidisciplinary medical and toxicological team which studied them in great depth and uncovered all kinds of things which had not been found before, in particular errors in diagnosis and errors in treatment, which made these three key cases into completely natural, even though unfortunate cases. And this is applied in particular to the trigger case. So this kind of ended happily, but still in the Netherlands there has not been a serious discussion about what went wrong in this case. And just recently the judge of the president of the court at The Hague, where the first trial took place, on his retirement, put out a plea to, we must study what went wrong in this case. People don't know. You can understand that the medical community is not very enthusiastic to go into that. Okay, now I must stop. Maybe that's a good place to stop. Let's leave it there. Thank you. Okay.
Not going to have any time for questions
No.
once again, but there will be others. I just want to add one thing that you didn't point out sufficiently, which is who is this Ton Derksen who wrote the book that has the case reopened? He was actually a family relation of the doctor in the hospital.
Yes.
He first accused Lucia, and he was just completely outside the case. They talked about it in the family. He and other members of the family became worried, wondered what was going on, and did their own completely amateur investigation from the outside. This is what it takes sometimes to penetrate into what's happening in the courts when these injustices happen. So everyone can do something, which I think is, you can do something, I can do something. I think this is a major thing to understand. We can help.